Okay, could you say something? Can you repeat?
Test of the test of the vocals, of the sound test.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, could you say something? Can you repeat? Okay,
Great. So we start with Tom Greenwood, then you, Mateusz, or Bob Tudor?
it's all listening to me. I'd like to be last because no one knows what's going to happen in the first 5 minutes of the stream, so it wasn't a smart idea on my part to put myself first.
It's the key to horror, is the unexpected.
Yeah. So maybe Adam, you could start by introducing our guests and saying a bit about what we're going to talk about.
We're live?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. So, hi everyone, I'm Adam Young, and this is the first panel today, on Saturday. We're starting the first session. It's called Plateau of Leng, so a concept from famous work by H.P. Lovecraft. And we've got three panelists today. Each will be sharing a talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour for a discussion. We will start with a presentation by Tom Greenwood. Horror, cliché, repeat, or why as above, so below should probably scare us. So, as above, so below, the famous Hermetic principle, but in this case, the title of the 2014 film by John Doodle, I think, with themes of repetition, some links to Dante's Inferno, and of course, we'll be exploring the intersection of horror and philosophy, like on all of the PhilosophyCon. So, Tom, let's start.
Thank you very much. And I'll just apologize at the start that I don't have the amazing backdrop that my co-presenter has, which is quite horrific. I have a Steelers banner. If anyone's a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, you'll know that's quite horrific as well at the moment to be a fan, but I'll move on. Okay. So something I think we always need to acknowledge is that there's a constant tension in the production of horror, whether in film, novel, video game, or even real life. And that tension is how it negotiates cliches of the genre. Every new work always risks being accused of being generic or repetitive, and frequently on the web pages of the Internet Movie Database, IMDb, they are. Reviews of films will always talk about, this is cliched, I've seen this before, blah, blah, blah. Now, cliches are something that we're meant to not like, but it's something I'm very interested in, and it's something I've just finished writing a book on called The Shock of the Same, which is out next month. I'm interested in them mainly because they are so often rejected from philosophical writing and seen as inherently bad, but at the same time seem to form something of a black hole in philosophical thought. How do you think about a lack of thinking? I'm not interested in cheering for cliches or repeating the same old condemnations of them, but rather I'm interested in what they do and how they do it. So, on the one hand, the relationship between horror and cliche can be seen being played out in any review on IMDb, but it's also captured by Eugene Thacker in his work on the horror of philosophy. Here he suggests, and this is a quote, "Given the degree of self-reflexivity in genre horror today, we are, most likely, well aware of the various ruses through which the fantastic is introduced. We are also aware of how quickly an apparently supernatural event in a horror story, such as the actual existence of vampires or zombies, gets recuperated into the understanding of how the world works, thereby becoming quite unexceptional and normal, even banal." In this way, the disdain for cliches in horror can perhaps be linked to a rather base criticism of late modern culture, which in fact dates from the 1960s, which is that we remain entranced by what Guy Debord called the society of the spectacle back in 1968, I think. So we continuously want more jump scares, more exhilaration, more blood, and so on. An enthusiasm for what Peter Sloterdijk terms catastrophilia. For Thacker, though, the spectacle is facile because the increasingly cataclysmic prospects for the world itself, the real world, make it unthinkable. The world manifests itself to us in the form of disaster, presenting us with, quote, an absolute limit to our ability to adequately understand the world at all. This, Thacker notes, is a central motif of the horror genre. As such, Thacker looks to horror to inform philosophy, not as a philosophy of horror, but a horror of philosophy. Quote, those moments in which philosophy reveals its own limitations and constraints, moments in which thinking enigmatically confronts the horizon of its own possibility. The thought of the unthinkable that philosophy cannot pronounce, but via a non-philosophical language. I like this sentiment, but because I'm interested in cliches, I find horror taking me in a different direction. After all, if horror presents to us the unthinkable, cliches present us with the unthinking, and that's the relationship I think is worth exploring. What rituals and processes and habits are at work which we take so habitually for granted that the realities of horror might be obscured? What lack of thinking goes into thinking the unthinkable? Okay, so that's kind of setting us up. If we're going to ask what the relationship between horror and cliche is, then I think we have to be honest and say the relationship is disappointment. If we've seen something before, it's not scary and even less unworldly or fantastical in the way Thacker wants horror to inform philosophy with. How many IMDb reviews begin, I was expecting so much more than this film, I was expecting so much better, and then it just became cliched. But for me, disappointment is interesting, mostly because it's something we really struggle to articulate in philosophy, even if it's there all the time. Why else think about the world philosophically unless there's something not right, some sense we could be doing something better? At the same time, this is accompanied by a ritualistic need for achievement in philosophy. Certainly as professional philosophers, we need to present a complete argument, an innovation to advance thought and maybe our careers, okay? So we can't be disappointed even though we are disappointed. Indeed, later on in his work, Thacker suggests, quote, surely every philosopher feels deep down that if we could have figured it out by now, we would have done so long ago. All that has changed is that we publish more books, not better books. He continues, from a certain vantage point, the history of Western philosophy looks like a somewhat panicky, feverish attempt to cover up the suspicion that there may not be more. Every excited, anxious assertion of there's got to be more covers up a more disappointing, more morose, this is it. For me, though, this reflects something at the heart of most good philosophy, which is what the Greeks termed metanoia. Metanoia, which literally means afterthought, was originally a goddess figure of regret and repentance, disappointment, appearing in classical images standing behind the god of opportunity, who was called Kairos. So she stood behind the god of opportunity. Once the opportunity had gone past, she sort of looked at it and examined it. The goddess of opportunity past was melancholic, but also represented a change of mind and heart. In other words, a transformation of the way we think. Indeed, Boris Groys argues that a secular form of metanoia has traditionally driven the work of philosophy as, quote, a radical change of mind through which a subject rejects everything that connected this subject to the old, ordinary, limited life perspective and opens itself up to a new, universal, infinite perspective of philosophical evidence. So, if disappointment is actually at the heart of the philosophical enterprise, then what does it mean to pause between the threshold of horror and cliche? Not in order to sustain the horror, as Thacker argues we should, but rather sustain the cliche as a potential site of horror-inspired metanoia. This brings me on to the film I want to discuss, which Adam mentioned in his introduction, which is John I think it's Dowdle rather than Doodle, but I don't know. John Dowdle's 2014 film, As Above, So Below. I'm not sure if many people have seen this film. It's not a great film. It has a rating of 26% on Rotten Tomatoes, if that means anything. But it's interesting, okay? The plot revolves around a scholar following the work of her father, searching for the Philosopher's Stone, finding a code in Nicholas Flamel's grave and breaking into the Paris catacombs to discover the stone's whereabouts. The film is all shot on headcams, giving a found footage style. Entering the catacombs illegally with a group of spelunkers, the tunnel they enter through collapses, forcing the party to go downwards. They then find themselves in front of a blocked tunnel, which their guide is reluctant to enter because his friend went through there before and never came back. However, as they squeeze through a different tunnel, they find themselves back in front of the blocked threshold. Eventually, they go through the forbidden tunnel and find themselves in what transpires to be the 9 levels of hell, whereupon they are all punished for their past sins, some horrifically. They are only able to escape when the surviving team confess their sins and take a leap of faith into a dark abyss, which takes them to a manhole, which leads to the streets outside. So it's a reenactment of Dante's Inferno in many senses. What is noticeable about this film and why I like it is how the well-worn tropes of horror are presented at this amazing pace. The characters are all archetypes of the genre: the overly committed researcher, the love interest reluctantly dragged along, the wily guide with a story to tell from his past, and so on. Their encounters as they descend retell Dante's Inferno, with each level copying its ordering of sins. The film also borrows heavily from its predecessors. There are clear reprises of the Da Vinci Code and Indiana Jones. At one point, a tunnel collapses on one of the characters as they panic, which more or less directly copies a scene from the 2005 film, The Descent, which is a fantastic film. Once inside hell, the film even starts to repeat itself with inverted mirror rooms and reconstructions of past events from the film. Such is the rush of horror cliches in the film that at one point the heroes walk past a room with some kind of demonic cult going on, and they don't even seem to notice it, right? They just get, there's just so many of these tropes going on, they can't stop and take them all in. However, amid this rush of cliches, there are key points where the film notably hesitates. The first is the hesitation in accessing the catacombs themselves. And the catacombs are actually a key character for the atmosphere of the film. This was actually the first ever production to be allowed to film inside the Paris catacombs. In the film, they are difficult to enter, requiring them to break in while being chased by the police. The second hesitation is the way, once inside, the protagonists routinely hesitate before a threshold. Threshold, I'm hoping that I think in Polish it's prog. But anyway, a threshold of some kind, an entrance to a tunnel, a hole they have to jump down, the manhole cover they have to lift. Each time they pause, they are reluctant to pass through. And of course, this is to heighten the tension or horror of what might lie beyond. However, this is troubled by the fact that crossing the thresholds are rarely difficult. In fact, the only thing stopping them is often merely a phrase or an inscription that makes reference to Dante's Inferno, although the protagonist bizarrely references the phrase that's over the gates of hell in Dante. They identify it as coming from mythology, which is interesting. In one case, crossing the threshold is so easy that a ghost simply shoves a character through it and they die. So it's this idea of the pause and the threshold that I'm really interested in. And what it says about the threshold between what we might call genuine horror, something new, something which tests the limits of our thought, like Eugene Thacker wants to, and the cliche, which I'm interested in. So to examine this, I want to draw again on the work of Boris Groys. Groys suggests that every cultural work,
We'll start
be it a film, a game, a novel, whatever, carries an attempt at a revaluation of values by engaging the concerns of the profane, or the everyday, or the ordinary, with that of the established cultural archives, or what is preserved beyond its original use and is therefore sacred in the broadest sense. For those who want to produce work that is alive or real or even super scary, these cultural archives indicate, by virtue of its preservation, that an idea is effectively already dead. Encased or entombed in the museum, it is no longer vital, but something to be challenged and superseded. Hence, the accusation that cliches are dying metaphors, as George Orwell once wrote. They are the recycling of the already accepted, staying inside the archive. This distinction between the profane and the sacred constitutes the new. The new is something that is different from what already exists and is recent, because the most up-to-date difference is the least likely to already exist. This is, of course, not just the process for recognizing the new, but also for attributing the cliche, which is conversely either similar or old. So something new is different and recent, something cliche is similar and old. For example, As Above, So Below uses the found footage format, which many of us will know saturated the market too recently for it ever to be thought of as novel anymore. Repeating Dante's work, meanwhile, is perhaps a more intriguing aspect of the film, due to the fact that Dante's work is so old. However, the idea of sinners receiving the punishment of their sin is also very prominent in recent horror, such as you think of a film like Cube, or more recently, there's a great film called Escape Room, which I think came out last year. It was very good. But Groys argues that this concept of novelty does not, in fact, oppose the archive or museum, despite its claims to the contrary. Rather, it works in a complementary relationship. The archive is only ever a limited representation of a particular place in time, a particular taste, a particular set of values. And as such, it might appear to be secondary to the lived experience of the present reality or of the new ideas that come along. But, Groys argues, what is real and what is new can only be defined in comparison to the archive. In other words, one can only ascribe difference and recency in relation to what is already existing as the same and old. And as a result, everything that is new is effectively already contained within the archives that exist. This is why I find the enthusiasm for spectacle, which I mentioned earlier as driving the condemnation of cliché. I think this enthusiasm is driven not by the need to be shocked by more blood or more surprises and more scares, but rather by a less well-seen need to mediate such shock, and in mediating that shock, master it. Consider how genuinely horrifying events are authenticated by documenting and sharing by digital recording, uploading to media platforming, reviewing on IMDb. Indeed, in a world saturated with images of horror, repetition itself becomes a key trope for expressing the limitations of our thought. For both the so-called society of the spectacle and the various attempts to resist it or reclaim critical thinking from it, both are seeking an event, either a spectacle or a more authentic reality or a horror, but only an event which is reproducible, curatable, and therefore storable in the cultural archive. This is what makes the event an event. This is also the irony of the IMDb reviews that complain about cliches in horror films. A genuinely new horror film wouldn't be a horror. Even when we think of masterpieces of the genre, like the Blair Witch Project, Saw, Night of the Living Dead, and so on, these are always repetitions of a kind. Horror involves the curation of well-worn tropes. It is premised on repetition. As a genre, it is always already reviving something. Sometimes this spirit of revival is quite literal. Think of Frankenstein's monster. Other times it revolves around crude stereotypes, the lonely farmhouse, the strange natives, and other times still the direct reboots of existing horrors, doubling down on particular aspects which speak to a more contemporary audience. The archive is therefore not a structure for monolithic preservation, rigid and unchanging, but rather a system which is constantly shifting its boundaries by virtue of what is not inside it. Groys says, every time the border between the archive and reality is transgressed in either direction, we experience joy over the possibility that this border may now be suspended or deconstructed for good. Yet these transgressions instead confirm the stability of the border, which guarantees the very possibility of such transgressions in the first place. Excuse me. That's the end of the quote. If we are looking for something new as something different, then we will always be reenacting the same logic and we will never be finding something that is actually different. Okay, as I said though, as above, so below is interesting because it seems to dispense with any effort to be different, other than via the two hesitations I previously noticed. So, what is their significance? When we talk of the archive, we need to be clear that the space available to anything is always changing. Museums close, digital capacity grows, and in this way, what is kept and what is not becomes a contested space, as just about anything profane outside the archive can be potentially counted as sacred inside the archive. The distinction between what is sacred and what is profane, or indeed what is horrific and what is cliched, thus rests on a shifting threshold. Its stability is only guaranteed by repetition, the repetition of novelties and differences, the repetition of the attempt to move away from the archive, which consequently reinforces it. Outside of the archive, profane spaces are not themselves valueless. They simply present fleeting and unpreserved values which can challenge, provoke, or mock the sacred. Groys understands the profane realm to reflect the values of the cultural archives. The profane realm is constantly renewed because it is constantly filled with the refuse and waste products of valorized culture. And it is precisely in this refuse and waste which we find cliches, terms which were once perhaps meaningful, but no longer sit in a clear place of reference to one particular thing. And if you ever look at Marshall McLuhan's work, From Cliche to Archetype, he makes a big thing about cliches of this rubbish pile of culture, but something that was once important, but kind of isn't now. Now here, going back to our film, the significance of the catacombs becomes prominent. As you might know, the catacombs is a network of tunnels in Paris where the stacked remains of skeletons from older graveyards of Paris were deposited. In this sense, the catacombs are, in real life, perhaps the ultimate profane remainder, a discarded collection of what was once monumentalized, a literal stockpile of horror cliches. In doing so, the catacombs become a curiously constructed anti-archive of horror, holding within them all of the horror tropes of the film, as well as the broader idea of a massive disturbed burial ground. What then if this film is presenting a mirror of invention, where rather than position itself in relation to a fixed archive of horror, it instead presents us with a profane anti-archive of cliches, where the thresholds are maintained not by clear lines between the sacred and the everyday, or by the strength of particular institutions, universities, libraries, newspapers, or by the repeated insistence on difference and thinking the unthinkable, but rather what if they are maintained through the repetition of hesitation? What if the very repetition of this act of refusal to cross the threshold suggests the transience of such a threshold itself? In other words, a conversion of the profane and the sacred into a disconcerting, uncanny collection of sacred cliches. What if this is a kind of metanoia of disappointment, a metanoia of disappointment that, as above, so below provides us? Well, the simple answer is I'm not sure, and I'm hoping people might be able to answer that question for me. I think, contrary to my title, the film may not scare us, and the idea of an anti-archive of cliches may not scare us. But perhaps it does open up a way of thinking about the disappointment of philosophy and what we can do with that, not in relation to monstrosities of difference and invention, but in relation to the mobility of horror, the everydayness of horror, and the intersection of horror and cliche within our everyday lives. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks. Perhaps we could now say that all these technical difficulties were just disappointments that are at the heart of the modern philosophy. Okay, let's try something else. Pop Tudor, are you ready?
Yes. So,
brief introduction from me and we'll start, okay? So our next guest is Pop Tudor with the presentation about campy flesh and blood, gothic and trash cinema. He'll be talking about the concept of camp, famously theorized by Susan Sontag in her book Notes on Camp, and the main focus of this presentation would be analyzing two films by Paul Morrissey, Flesh for Frankenstein and Blood for Dracula, both described by the author Pop Tudor as trash films. So let's jump right into it.
so yeah. So I aim to describe how Gothic symbols are employed by camp and trash cinema and how they are signified. Firstly, I will try to underline important aspects that have been theorized and outlined by Susan Sontag in her essay Notes on Camp. And following this, I will try to apply those principles to the movies in question. So Flesh for Frankenstein and Blood for Dracula by Paul Morrissey. So as a definition, so camp is a sensibility. It is described as such, as its essence being the love of the unnatural and of exaggeration. It's an aesthetic style of sensibility that finds something appealing precisely because of its bad taste and ironic value. So she kind of marks the difference between three types of different sensibilities, the camp being the third one. The first one being that of high culture, which is completely moralizing, and the second one is that of extreme states of feeling that actually creates a tension between the moralizing effect and aesthetic passion. So camp distinguishes itself by being completely aesthetic and somewhat avoiding the artistic product of content. So why is camp not bad art? So camp, from a serious point of view, it can be seen as bad art or kitsch, but it doesn't talk about beauty. It rather approaches different levels of artifice, and this is how we can talk about it. So the two different types of camp. So Sontag marks the difference between the two types of camp, saying that one is the naive camp and the second one is the intentional camp. And she states that the pure examples of camp are unintentional, they are dead serious. So they kind of have this purity about them, this naive quality, a seriousness that fails. So think, for example, of the movie, the 2003 movie, The Room by Tommy Wiseau. It's actually a bad movie, but we can enjoy it as being like so bad it's good. So thus it's making it like satisfying. But she states that not everything that is serious but fails can be described as camp. She says that it needs to be a mixture of the exaggerated, the passionate, and the naive. So something that its ambition, that in its ambition, it's like its grandeur is enough, but then it fails. And the second category is that of intentional camp, a camp that tries to be camp, which is pretty self-explanatory. So the case of the movies in question, I think that it's interesting because they are not classical camp as described by Sontag, and also like a lot of film critics and theoreticians say that they are not camp at all. So I found in this book the films of Paul Morrissey by Maurice Yokar, this different film critics that describe Morrissey. For example, David Bourbon describes him as lacking even the slightest trace of self-mockery and or campiness. John Russell Taylor describes Morrissey's characters as never patronized, never made fun of, never presented as material for a quick camp giggle. And even the conclusion of this book says that describes Morrissey as a complete outcast, an odd man out with no camp in either sense, safe from his subversion. But I would say that there are two different methods of interpreting these movies. The first one, if we actually say that the movies are not camp, which is to say that we give into what the filmmaker Morrissey says about his productions, that they don't fail because they don't want to be serious, rather they want to be a comedy. But so we should treat it as such. And in this case, then we can try to dissect different parts of the movies, and then we see that they are not complete wholly camp. So, for example, a natural setting, and as Susan Sontag says, nothing in nature can be campy, or not so over the top objects, not embellished enough, apart from the cape that Count Dracula wears, which kind of resembles human hair, like it's made out of extensions of hair or something. But I would argue that then we can try to analyze the movies in a different way. And if we consider them to be kind of naive camp, unintentional camp, a seriousness that fails. And I would say that they are camp because of their ambition not only to be aesthetic, not merely comedic, not just for the enjoyment of the sake of artifice, but actually the satire, the irony, and the social-political commentaries about Marxism or social classes or misogyny and so on. The movie presents take themselves very seriously, but they fail to come across that way. And they fail to transmitting their intention. So what we see is a movie with moralizing intent, are movies with a moralizing intention of deconstructing different aesthetic principles, even the ones of camp. But what they succeed in doing is to be, after all, aesthetic movies. So the moralizing undertone in the background dissolving in front of the aesthetic nature of them. And basically, they convert the serious into the frivolous, as Sontag outlines to be one of the main characteristics of camp. So, in the case for Blood for Dracula, the level of artifice is conceptually shown from the beginning. So we see Udo Kier applying makeup, we see him dyeing his hair, so we basically see the actor transform into the vampire. The same case is for the character development. From the beginning till the end, they are every character is presented as, and I quote, a state of continual incandescence, as being one very intense thing, which Sontag describes this as being a way that camp characters are constructed. So they are almost shouting at us, like, I'm a vampire, I'm a mad scientist, I know the Marxist, and so on. So leaving us unable to penetrate this surface they present us. Here is when the lens of camp, which blocks out content, comes into discussion. So and now I will try to make a parallel with what she says about Art Nouveau. And she says that a complete analysis of this artistic movement would scarcely equate it with camp. But in this analysis, we should not ignore what actually allows us to experience something as camp. And we should as well accept the things that are camp in those movies. Yeah. And following this, the last part of my presentation, I am talking about how the symbols are resignified and how they are employed by the camp aesthetic. So the symbols are resignified precisely because they are devoid of context. So their use creates this sort of horror narrative. The movies present themselves as being about Frankenstein or Dracula, names that enter our head, and we kind of know what will happen in the movies. And we understand them as such. So like the mad scientist, the vampire. Yeah, as I said, we kind of have this image of what the movies are about, and the titles actually like front this. Flash for Frankenstein. Maybe the movie, it's gonna be about Dr. Frankenstein who wants Flash for his project of creating something, or Blood for Dracula. Dracula searches for blood, presumably the one of a virgin, because yeah, that's the plot. So the movie can actually be whatever it wants to be. We just see this kind of surface, and the symbols and how much they count in the story. Well, they can't count as long as they present us with the idea and the archetype as long as they represent an archetype of pop culture, and because of their repetitive use, they have lost their meaning. So those symbols are taken and used as they exist in pop culture without their original form being the one emphasized. Yeah, so this was it. I tried to analyze how Gothic tropes are employed by pop culture, showing that they turned out to be just empty frames that can be used as narratives that can be easily considered and experienced as camp.
Great, thank you. Quite interesting. Okay, let's move to the last presentation. Now we've got Mateusz Sawczyn with the Übermensch and Nietzscheans, when Nietzsche met Roddenberry, and we'll be talking about famous concept of Übermensch or Overman by Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, and the TV series Andromeda, which was based on the notes created by Gene Roddenberry, the original creator of famous Star Trek. So Nietzscheans in serialized form, and the concept of Overman or Übermensch.
Thank you, Adam. So before I get to the Andromeda itself, I would like to say a few words about Nietzsche in movies and TV series. Of course, my predecessors were talking about horror, so this is a bit different, but we're all obviously movie buffs, so I think you might enjoy it also. So how is Nietzsche and his thought represented in cinema in general? You can hear a quote from Nietzsche, or rather read it at the beginning of one of Lenny Kravitz's videos, The Chamber, I think. You can see quotes from Nietzsche in animes. You can see girls who tattoo. I've actually seen a girl who had a Nietzsche tattoo, a Nietzsche quote tattoo, but it was in Latin because she didn't know he was a German thinker, so Latin was cooler. Nietzsche has penetrated our culture on many different levels, and most of the time the depictions of his thought and himself are not accurate at all. It's all a big misunderstanding. You can find quasi-biographical pictures like When Nietzsche Wept, based on a novel, but it's completely fictional. You can see a TV series called Wagner. It has a couple of episodes on Nietzsche. It's actually a bit interesting. There's this famous movie by Andrzej Tarkowski called The Sacrifice, filled with Nietzsche's quotes and discussions about the eternal recurrence or return. And there's also the Turing horse that is supposed to be inspired by Nietzsche, but this 5-hour-long movie has nothing to do with Nietzsche at all. So this is what we're dealing with. People take his name, take a quote from him, and do whatever they want. Hitchcock did a similar thing with his movie The Rope. That is actually a pretty interesting movie technically, because it was made to appear like it was just shot in one shot. There are actually some cuts in the movie, but you cannot see them if you're not looking for them. And in this movie there's these two youngsters who decide to kill someone from fun. And after they've done it, the movie starts with it, and they hide the body in a wooden box. And then they have a party to see if anyone will find out that they've murdered someone. And they also invite their philosophy professor who's taught them about Nietzschean ideas, Oberman included. And someone says to one of the murderers, obviously you agree with Nietzsche's theory and his Oberman, just like Hitler. And this is another problem, because everyone who's ever studied Nietzsche knows that he wasn't the proto-Nazi he's made out to be by some people. Although I found some interesting information, the Nuremberg Tribunal after World War II actually decided that Nazism was based on Nietzsche's works. So it's official. So some people have declared so. Of course, there's also the case of Nietzsche's sister and the will to power. To put it shortly, Nietzsche wasn't a Nazi. But it's a subject for another talk. So all these misunderstandings, all these misinterpretations are multiplied with every new cultural object that is created. And there is of course this series that I would like to talk about. But before I get to that, one or two remarks about Nietzsche in general. The Overman and the Master Race are, of course, not Nazis, as some would claim. And Nietzsche wasn't this power-hungry individual. His philosophy wasn't all about it. Actually, he despised the lust for power, and especially lust for power by politicians, especially the democratic ones who didn't hold democracy. He didn't think very highly of democracy, and the idea that anyone who has the ambition can rule over people. Also, there's pictures of Nietzsche, or rather posters, in the movie Warrior by Gavin O'Connor, very good movie. In The Little Miss Sunshine, there's this young boy who decided not to speak as a test of his will, and he also worships Nietzsche. Even Jana Jameson, the porn star, acted in a movie Zombie Strippers, which I've seen and I regret it to this day. And she's reading Nietzsche in this movie. Even Ultron from the Avengers quotes Nietzsche. "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger," he says in the movie. So everyone was a part of Nietzsche, and the Trekkers or the Trekkies wanted him too. That's why Gene Roddenberry created a race based on Nietzschean ideas called the Nietzscheans. And the series was supposed to be called Andromeda Ascendant. In the end, it was just called Andromeda. And it's about a systems commonwealth, an organization, an empire really that spanned over 3 galaxies. And this epic story actually begins with the Commonwealth being destroyed by Nietzscheans. Why did they do it? They were the part of the Commonwealth, and they planned their betrayal for years, because there was also this race of hairy, violent, primitive magogs that had only one goal: to devour all life in the galaxy. And the Commonwealth, in a strategic move, decided to sacrifice one Nietzschean planet to the Magog in order to regroup and better prepare themselves for a final confrontation. The Nietzscheans didn't like the idea, and because of that, they decided the Commonwealth must be destroyed, but they succeeded. This is what happens before the actual series, or rather in the first episode. And then we skip a couple hundred of years and see the galaxy in disorder. There is no longer any Commonwealth, and the Nietzscheans didn't actually fare well without it, but we'll get to it in a moment. The main character of the series is Captain Dylan Hunt, played by Kevin Sorbo. If you've watched the series Hercules, you definitely know the guy. And you also know that he's not a great actor, so it says something about the series. It's not great on many levels, but the Nietzschean aspect is very interesting. So how did Roddenberry, or rather Robert Hewitt Wolf, who developed the series, understand Nietzscheans, or how did they create the race? Robert Hewitt Wolf was also the person responsible for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and unfortunately, as we'll see in a moment, his departure from Andromeda changed the series drastically, and not for the better. So Nietzscheans are understood from a biological perspective at first. They are called Homo sapiens invictus, and were genetically engineered by Paul Museveni. Invictus, of course, undefeatable. They are stronger, faster than the people. They have this retractive bones that they can use as weapons. They can eat wood, everything that's organic. They can hear ultrasounds. They can hold their breath for 20 minutes, and they can live over 150 years. Also, they have no genes for astigmatism, acromegaly, arteriosclerosis, and although they have the same number of chromosomes that we Homo sapiens sapiens do, their code is protected against mutations, so there's no evolution. And also there's this curious thing called genetic reincarnation. The idea is that if the gene pool is closed and there can be no changes, eventually a configuration of genes will repeat itself. This is obviously an echo of the eternal recurrence idea by Nietzsche. This is why they await the return of the first Nietzschean, Drago Museveni, the most perfect specimen. Although it doesn't make sense, why is he more perfect than all his descendants if the genes don't degrade and don't mutate? So this is the basic Nietzschean physiology. And what about culture and their philosophy? Nietzscheans don't believe in optimism, they believe in survival. That's a quote from the series. They follow Nietzsche's teachings with religious devotion. But this is also problematic, because Nietzsche in Also sprach Zarathustra, I'm not sure about the English title. So spake Zarathustra, something like this. Thus spake Zarathustra. Nietzsche claims that a teacher-student relation or a master-student relation isn't what's needed for his character Zarathustra. The prophet cannot actually teach people, he can only give them advice on how to develop themselves, how to experience life themselves. This is also something you can find in Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, this idea that knowledge cannot be passed on but must be experienced personally. And this is a bit true for the Nietzscheans in the series, but they do read a lot of Nietzsche. They read a lot in general, both literature and poetry. Tyr Anasazi, the main Nietzschean character of the series, says, never underestimate the power of the world. So they take their lectures very seriously. They consider themselves warrior poets. Survival and living to the fullest and trying to better themselves are the true things that they care about, except family, but we'll talk about family in a bit. So Nietzscheans are also very suspicious. They were the only ones to realize that the Magog were as dangerous as they turned out to be later. They never had any doubts that they would try to destroy everything and kill everyone, while the Commonwealth representatives were sure that they can be reasoned with. Nietzscheans like to live dangerously and to experience life to the full. Tyr is a mercenary, a warrior, an assassin, but he's also a painter and a poet, and he plays basketball very dirty, or fouls all the way. Nietzscheans consider everything that's beautiful dangerous. When Tyr looks at a black hole, he of course he quotes Nietzsche and says that when you look into the abyss looks at you. And this idea that what is beautiful is dangerous is actually embodied by the Dragonia vine, a plant that was genetically engineered by Drago Museveni, the first Nietzschean himself. The Dragonia vine is so beautiful, it has such a beautiful scent that it lures its victims and then it just kills them. Also, Tyr mentions that he's never seen a devil with horns and tail, but the devil is also hidden under a pretty face. But what do they actually take from Nietzsche? Well, the problem with Nietzsche's philosophy is that his program isn't positive. It's not easy It is easy to see his critique of Christianity and nihilism, but what do you do after you've overcome these values? Various answers can be given, but none can be given lightly, because Nietzsche never mentions explicitly do this, do that. He mentions that you need to find your own virtue and you have to pursue it. But how to do it, what should it be, and it's more complicated. Nietzscheans are perfectionists that try their virtue is doing everything in the best way they can. So even in the face of death, if they have fought bravely and well, they are satisfied. Another very important thing is, as I've said before, the family. This is also a bit weird, but it works well in the series, but I don't remember Nietzsche being a great advocate for having a big, great family, because obviously he himself was a loner, and his thoughts on women are also a bit funny in some regards. So this survival and living dangerously, how do these two things combine? In procreation, of course, because procreation, creating a family, is the ultimate goal for every Nietzschean. That is also why they take everything very seriously, including games. If you play checkers or chess with Nietzscheans, they are going to cheat every chance they get, because if they lose a game, they are viewed as inferior. And if they are inferior, they won't be accepted by the potential mate and their clan, because this is also a thing, and they will never procreate. Their genes won't be passed on, and they will die forever. There will be also no chance for their genetic reincarnation, I suppose. So rivalry is a way to check one's worth. Being a husband and father is the highest honor for a Nietzschean male, and for the female being a mother. And what is also interesting, the mothers, the Nietzschean females, never leave their colonies. They always spend time with the children. As Nietzsche said, by the way, Nietzsche is called the great philosopher in the series. Man is only the means for a woman. The child is always the goal. So this makes sense in the context of how Nietzschean women were portrayed in the series. By the way, if a Nietzschean woman is infertile, she can reclaim her glory by fighting bravely. So she basically becomes like a man. Nietzsche's hate races that don't respect their young. They show mercy only to other fathers and husbands, and they respect another philosopher, Machiavelli, because Nietzscheans are always scheming, always strategic, and they basically have their sense of honor isn't what we were used to. Drago Museveni is an important figure for Nietzscheans. They have his mummified remains guarded somewhere, and they are necessary to be analyzed when a potential genetic reincarnation of Drago Museveni returns. But the thing is that after Robert Hewitt Wolf led the series, this genetic reincarnation idea was very badly handled. In the beginning, it was if someone was genetically reincarnated, they would have the same body, they would look the same, but they could have a different character. And when Drago Museveni was actually reincarnated in season 5 or 6, I'm not sure, he had dark skin, he was a little boy, and Drago Museveni was practically Aryan. He was this big, blonde, white guy. So how does it work? It doesn't make sense. The series had, in the late seasons, the series had many problems like that. How do we explain the difference of characters when the body stays the same? This is also a motive that can be found in various interpretations of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. In German, die ewige Wiederkunft des Gleichen. It means actually the eternal return of the equal, not of the same, although it could be translated both ways. So you could understand this idea that everything returns, having the same sum total, but some elements could be different. But this is a very efficient interpretation. So would Drago Museveni actually be a great leader for the Nietzscheans? Not necessarily. He could have the same body, obviously he didn't in the series, but his character could be different. There are two other things. How much time do I have left? Could you tell me?
We are a bit early, so I guess you could talk for about 8 minutes.
Okay, I can manage it. So, two other things. How does Nietzschean society look? What does it look like? And also, who are the true Nietzscheans? So, we have this clan structure. There are different clans that compete with each other for ruling over all Nietzscheans, and there are these two funny terms. We are all Cluj, to Nietzsche's, because we are inferior beings, and Nietzsche's in return are called Ubers by the Kluge. And Nietzsche's, although they have this rivalry between clans, they have some sense of solidarity as a race. For example, if a Nietzschean kills another one, or another clan is at war with a different one, this is not really a problem. This is the way the Nietzscheans live. But if you're not a Nietzschean and you say decimate a whole Nietzschean village or something like that, you're going to have a big problem, because you're just a Kluge or some other inferior alien, and you have no right to take a Nietzschean life. But in the end, when Tyr had a chance to risk his own life, he would probably have died and saved hundreds of thousands of Nietzscheans. He chose his own life instead. So in the end, Nietzscheans are very selfish. Although he did share a single tear when he heard from his captain. This was a very Nietzschean behavior, and he said it wasn't it? How do Nietzscheans treat other races? The biggest clan, or rather a combination of two clans by marriage, because this is like aristocracy. So if a ruler from one clan marries a ruler from another, you can get something like the Drago-Kazov clan, so the Drago and Kazov combined, and they are the biggest slave owners in all the galaxies. They have over 837 enslaved planets. Humans try to fight them by forming Knights of Genetic Purity, which sounds a bit like Ku Klux Klan to me, but they're supposed to be the good guys, or rather the reactionaries that lost their way. Nietzscheans often make friendships. They help you as well as they can, but this is always for their own interest. Tyr and Asazi, in the end, after 5 seasons of being a friend to Dylan Hunt and saving his life and so on, betrays him and tries to kill him, because this friendship no longer benefits him, and Dylan's death would. So never trust a Nietzschean, no matter how great his smile is and no matter how many beers you've drank together. What else? This clan structure. There are different clans, and this is the final point I'd like to make by presenting 2 clans. There's the Jaguar clan. Although Tyrann Asazi is this very big, muscular guy, and most Nietzscheans are great fighters and adventurers, explorers, pirates, and so on, clans like the Jaguar clan have no interest in that. Because they are great at scheming. They make alliances, they have great strategies, and they are also very decadent. They just drink wine and scheme, and this is what they enjoy. And I would like to now use a quote from the series. I will be translating from Polish for some reason. The clan leader Charlemagne Bolivar says in one episode, there are 3 reasons why you should let the Sabra Jaguar clan into the new Commonwealth, because Commonwealth gets restored at some point. First, we are known for our treachery. We are at war with the Drago-Kazov clan. Why you shouldn't let us in the Commonwealth. So we are known for our treachery. We are at war with the Drago-Kazov clan, and we will always remind you of your genetic inferiority. On the other hand, there are 2 reasons why you should let us into the Commonwealth. We are known for our treachery. We are at war with the Drago-Kazov clan, and did I mention we have the 3rd biggest fleet in the universe. Also, at one point, Tyr asks the same man, what do you want, Jaguar? And he says, the usual, hundreds of grandchildren, absolute power over the known space, and the delight of hearing that all my enemies died in terrible, highly improbable accidents that cannot be linked to me. And you? He asks Tyr, and Tyr responds, the usual. So this gives a bit of insight into the Nietzschean character. Unfortunately, when Wolf left the series, the matter got a bit more complicated, and the whole Nietzschean idea was revamped. It started making sense on some levels, but it also gives you perhaps something that was closer to some interpretations of Nietzsche's Overman, who should be rather a creator rather than a destroyer. Perhaps a poet more than a warrior. So there's this plant that has isolated itself, lives on archaeology, this planet, and they criticize all the other Nietzscheans, especially Gregor Kazov, slave owners or warmongers. They have a democracy. They've had it for generations. They make all the decisions together by entering this.
Okay, we are in the time for discussion, so maybe the closing statement.
Okay, so there's this peaceful Nietzschean race, and they criticize all the other Nietzscheans. This makes the thing a bit more complicated. So even in Andromeda, we have, although it's a simple series, it gets as convoluted as Nietzsche's own ideas, and in the end, who is the true Nietzschean? I don't think you can say. Either he's a scheming assassin, or he's a true creator, a painter, architect, and so on, the very best of what humanity has ever aspired to be. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We've got about 30 minutes for discussion, and a friendly reminder to all of our watchers on YouTube: you could ask questions in chat, and I will present them to our guests. So actually, we've got one question already to all of the guests from Alexandru Adam. Hi, a question for all of you. Should we be afraid that in pop culture everything seems to turn into a cliché, from gothic characters to famous philosophers, or should we enjoy it aesthetically?
Shall I go first? I think that's a really great question. And I think the question back is, if we are to be concerned about this sort of descent into cliche, it's what's at stake, and how realizable is what's at stake. Because if it's the pursuit of some kind of authenticity or sort of primal event, then for me that sort of obscures the way that we frame and curate our sense of the event and the meaning in today's world. You know, when we have, you know, we watch a film and we've got our phone and we've got our, you know, we've got our laptop and we've got, you know, and this is great. I think so. I don't think we should despair that it becomes cliche. I think, you know, and I'm going to say this because I've just written a book on it, but I think we should find it interesting, but not so interesting that it stops being a cliche, right? Cliches aren't fun all the time. The other question I'd sort of fire back unfairly because he's on chat, but are cliches just about aesthetics? Because I think we can enjoy cliches at a number of levels, and I think they are enjoyed on a number of levels that go beyond just aesthetics. I think habit and ritual and those sort of comfort points that we have. But these points are at work in our critical thinking, in our critiques of pieces. You know, we all have the arguments we like to drop down to. And I think this is why, just to link to Matthias's paper, I think this is why Nietzsche is so interesting, and Nietzsche's use in popular culture is so interesting, because in some senses, and this is kind of half a question for Matthias as well, in some senses, so Nietzsche's writing not to be studied, right? There's something really horrible when you're at a university trying to teach students Nietzsche at the same time as trying to teach them the correct way to reference their essays, right? It doesn't work because you've got this really formal system telling you how to think, and then you've got Nietzsche, you know, standing on a cliff and shouting. And so for me, there's always got to be Nietzsche's texts are always asking to be engaged with as a performance. So in that sense, you know, the question is, when we see all these horrible uses of Nietzsche, and some quite good uses of Nietzsche in culture, is that performance of Nietzsche actually a better reading? Even though it's a bad reading, it's a better reading than the kind of academic books that we write about it. So even though they're bad readings of Nietzsche, they're actually good readings of Nietzsche because they're doing it in the right way. Even though they end up as cliches, you know, in effect, that's exactly what Nietzsche's writing through the whole way through. He's talking in terms of stereotypes and commonplaces. So sorry, that probably wasn't as concise an answer as you wanted, but that's my answer.
Great, thank you. There's definitely something subversive about talking about Nietzsche on university, especially when he is criticizing like modern state, and you're just engaging with his thought in modern state apparatus. So it's funny, kind of ironic, perhaps, or subversive. Okay, let's handle the questions to the rest of the panel.
Nietzsche had a problem, like biographical problems with academia. He was basically kicked out of his first professorship. The question that you had for me, could you restate?
Yeah, sure. Should we be afraid that in popular culture everything seems to turn into a cliché, or should we enjoy it aesthetically?
I meant Tom's question, but never mind, because I wanted to talk about cliches as well. Before I get to this question, Nietzsche's academic interpretations are sometimes awful. Like when you read Deleuze, half of it makes sense, half of it is not about Nietzsche at all. So what is it? It is also a problem with Heidegger. So there's this philosopher I value very highly, George Colley. He says that Nietzsche shouldn't be read. He prepared a critical edition of Nietzsche's work, so he's the person who's read him for decades. So who's better to listen to about Nietzsche than this guy? Unfortunately, he wasn't translated into English, and it doesn't look like he's going to be anytime soon. But what he says is, Nietzsche must be experienced. You must talk with Nietzsche by reading his books over and over in dialogue, because it's not a systematic philosophy that can be understood. So what you said about bad uses of Nietzsche in culture, perhaps that's actually better than reading interpretations, because you actually engage with the material. It can make you laugh, cry or something. I've laughed a lot watching the Andromeda. And if you're actually interested in the topic, you're going to read Nietzsche eventually, right? So maybe these cliches, stereotypes, Nietzsche being present in culture is also something valuable. And as to cliches and horror, horror is a cliche in itself. You have this typical slasher movie. There's the jock, there's the slut, there's the virgin, and they all get what they deserve. And the sin is always punished. It's a pop culture cliche in general. So I think we do enjoy the cliches, and actually the constructing cliches, it sometimes makes me angry about okay, I'll just give you an example. There's this new horror cinema like the Witch of the Witch, the Hereditary, Midsummer. These are all called horror movies, but they all deconstruct these cliches, and there are just horror elements to them. So are they really horror? Because without the cliches, without the form, as you said, can we say that it's the same thing, or is it a new thing? Can we enjoy what we're used to without being the thing they should be based upon? So, what do you think then? Oh, Tudor.
Yeah, like I guess when thinking about the horror, we can think about like the aesthetic of it or like the feeling it can provide. And like, as you said, I found it very interesting, like giving the examples of Midsommar and Hereditary. And I was thinking about like It Follows as well, because actually it kind of creates this kind of tension because nothing happens and we just know like this is like some sort of a creature that exists. We don't actually know the variables in which this creature like exists, but we just have this kind of feeling of terror and something. But like coming to like the question that Alexandru asked us, I guess like when it comes to pop culture, things are meant to be enjoyed aesthetically as well. And yeah, I guess it's not like, I guess we shouldn't see them as being harmful or something. We should just take them as they are and enjoy them.
Okay, great, thank you. I've got a question for Tom. I looked up your book, The Shock of the Same and Anti-Philosophy of Clichés, and I'm interested how you discern between philosophy and anti-philosophy. You list anti-philosophical thinkers as Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, or Derrida. So I'm interested in how the philosophy and anti-philosophy are connected or are different.
That's a good question. In some senses, I use the term anti-philosophy because I wanted to be clear to audiences to not expect the kind of classic philosophy of, and actually that's something I got from reading Eugene Thacker in his work on the horror of philosophy. That because when I look at this stuff and even in the papers, I like picking out these sort of interesting things, and there always comes a point when you have to sort of bring it to a conclusion, and that's always the artificial point for me. I don't necessarily want a conclusion. I mean, again, when I look at people like Nietzsche or Kierkegaard, you don't find prescriptions and conclusions and things like that. You just sort of get the end of a performance. The way that I use anti-philosophy is in the way that someone like Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp, created anti-art. So he sticks a urinal in the museum, and it's art, but it's not art, right? So anti-philosophy, it's not sort of against philosophy, but it's a bit of a shift around, and one might argue that what I'm doing is philosophy, and that's fine. It's not, I'm not. It's not a movement or anything, but very, very simply, it's about trying to look at sites, starting from sites, rather than starting from the universal picture and trying to hone down and give examples. It's trying to start from particular sites of unease and tension, and thinking what within this can we see as a sort of glimpse of something more, perhaps universal, something perhaps more significant, and in many senses that's why like I look at as above, so below. I don't look at that in the book, by the way. That's is a separate thing. But why I wanted to look at that film was precisely because on the one hand it's not a particularly great film, but there are moments in it. It's an enjoyable film. It's a very enjoyable film to watch. But it's like say it's not well loved. But there are moments in that film when you just suddenly go, this has got me thinking about something, you know, precisely because of this arrangement of cliches and stuff like this. Now, if we start from your conventional philosophical approach, you've almost already dismissed the cliches because you want meaning and you want purpose and you want, you know, argument and all that sort of stuff. So I prefer to start from the mess and see what the mess tells us, rather than trying to create some, you know, from the mess create a sort of secondary ideal. So I don't know if that helps. It's a loose term, I should say. It's not like in the sense of like Laruelle's non-philosophy or anything like that. I'm not interested in those kind of, you know, big statements. It was more just a way to justify an approach that didn't start at chapter 1 and develop to chapter 10, but rather just sort of meander around all these different places, because that was that's how I see cliches working, and in a sense that's exactly what Pop was saying about, you know, we've got pop culture. There's, on the one hand, we don't need to academicize that, but on the other hand, the academic stuff is in there. You know, the big ideas are in there. So we just need to be a bit more mobile as we move in between them, rather than appropriate one into the other.
Off remark. I've seen the movie, and what struck me was the main character is basically Lara Croft. There's no difference at all. And then when the movie progresses, actually I find the ending a bit disappointing. But this is staying true to the idea of the cliche, because when you think there's going to be something unexpected in the movie, finally, no, it still follows the same pattern. It's cliche after cliche. And actually, I was thinking about this movie a lot. For such a bad movie, it's actually very surprising how it can occupy your thoughts. And I came to the conclusion that I enjoyed most of the movie, although every single element was so bad. It was so how is it even possible? It's a masterpiece in this regard.
I think there's also a wonderful bit at the end when they escape, and they've been through hell. They've confronted these horrific things they've done in the past. They've lost, not to give spoilers, but a lot of them have died. And they just kind of go out in the street and sort of go and sort of walk off. Like what? And it's almost like the whole film says it's insignificant. It's like it's an entire cliche in action. And there's just something about it. It almost ends like a different film when they're just like, well, there we go, on to the next one. So yeah, but I think there's a way, and this in a sense relates to what Pop was talking about in that sort of intentional camp. I don't think any of it is intentional. I think if it was intentional, it would be hammed up a lot more, and it wouldn't work in the same way. I think it has to take itself absolutely seriously to work in that way. Because if it tried to ham it up, it would just be a terrible film, and possibly not a very funny one. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. We've got two comments or statesmen from Piotr Trembacz, love as above, so below. And earlier, Nietzsche's philosophy is very shallow in horror. It ends up with a bad overman and rejection of moral principles, which eventually leads to murder as the final stage of initiation. Probably it's not really a question, but perhaps someone would like to comment on this.
Well, this is basically what happens in The Rope by Alfred Hitchcock. They think themselves to be superior to everyone else, so in order to truly test if they're overmen, which of course they aren't, because the idea is a bit more complicated than that. So the true test is, will they feel remorse after killing anyone? someone who was inferior? Will they get caught? Can they live above society? There's this cliché, and it has some merit actually, because Nietzsche does postulate that in order to, of course, the Overman is an idea that is unachievable. It's something, it's ideal, and in order to strive to become something like an Overman, you must reject the values of society. So you must be disruptive to society in a way. You cannot follow the same patterns, and for that, as Nietzsche mentions in Gay Knowledge, society always tries to destroy the individual, because they are the disruptors, and although they may act, because they act for their own benefit, and they can become a more perfect human being and so on, but they also act against society. Being selfish in this way is always not necessarily bad for the others because of taking advantage of them, but because showing them that the society is just an artificial structure that doesn't need to exist at all. Everyone could live their own way. So actually it's the danger of knowledge spreading, of the knowledge that you can create your own values. And let's be honest, cinema most of the time isn't equipped to handle such themes, especially not thriller movies meant to make a lot of money. So yeah, this cliche is.
I think there's something really interesting. Oh, sorry, Maciej. Go on.
I just wanted to mention the violence. There's always violence connected with Nietzsche when he's depicted. This is a given. And Nietzsche is about creation, in the way I understand it, not destruction.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think what's often lost when we take Nietzsche as a kind of, I mean, what makes Nietzsche really great is that he has these lines that we can memorize. You know, God is dead and we have killed him, and Übermensch, and all these kind of figures, and that, you know, quite deliberate. This is a violent way of writing, right? Because it's a kind of sloganized way of writing. When he talks about philosophizing with a hammer, you know, it's about trying to take apart your Hegel's and your Kant's with these really long, massive books with all these tiny details, and he's like, no. What about this? I think the association with actual physical violence, you know, it's less pronounced. But I think the idea that him being shallow on horror, I think that's a really interesting comment, because, you know, in effect, what Nietzsche's trying to do, or what I read him as trying to do, I wouldn't speak for him. He's essentially trying to make this in-depth knowledge that we have and that's been passed down through centuries, and say this is really shallow. This is nothing, you know. So we've got Plato and we've got Christianity, and actually they're the same thing, you know. And we've got morality and we've got slavery, and actually they're the same thing. So all the way through, he's saying, well, actually no, we think there's differences here, which gives us the illusion of depth, but actually it's all the same. So how do we imagine something that's actually different and actually, you know, developmental? And of course, what I always love about the Übermensch is that in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, after the Übermensch is announced, it finishes with Zarathustra getting annoyed because no one's understood him. So he just goes back to his cave again, where he starts. It all just starts at the beginning again, like nothing's ever happened. So again, I think there's a shallowness to Nietzsche on some of the things he talks about, like his view on women and things like that, which is, you know, like a negative shallowness. But there's also a shallowness that's key to what he's trying to do. And I think that comes out when you see these kind of film interpretations of, you know, the Nietzscheans. When they try and add a depth or a system to it, they end up repeating something quite different, you know, like a violent tribe or a kind of neo-Darwinian, you know, slightly Nazi sort of approach to things, which I don't think I don't think you necessarily find in Nietzsche. But then, you know, there's a lot of Nietzsche to read, so maybe I've just missed those bits.
Yeah, actually, lately I've heard the term Darwinian being connected with Nietzsche a lot, and I was a bit surprised by it, because where does he mention this striving for survival and survival of the fittest? Even if it does, it's not the main idea. It's all about bettering yourself, not bettering of the species. Actually, there is in the gay knowledge there is something that he said disease can be good and healthy, because Nietzsche likes to play with these opposites. So disease and disease individual might actually be for the benefit of the species, because if an individual is degenerate and tries to change the status quo, he can change it for the better. But I don't see a Darwinian meaning in any of this.
Okay, we've got two more comments. First one is from Józefina Jagielska. I have heard somewhere that movies are easier to take when they are somehow self-aware. Include inside jokes, for example. Okay, and another, I read both, maybe then we'll comment. And another comment from Piotr Trębacz. Does horror use making things shallow at all to create action and build interesting scenarios? Cliché. Okay, let's unpack the first one with the self-awareness of movies, perhaps breaking the fourth wall, which makes them presumably easier to digest.
I think the self-awareness in movies is it's linked to a lot of it's a link to, I think, to I mean, for one thing, it's, you know, the first time you see a self-aware movie, it's funny, and then the 18th time you see it, it's really irritating. It's like just try and be, you know, a proper film. But I think where you see a lot of self-awareness is in something that has absolutely taken over horror movies, which is the reboot, you know, the remake, which have to be self-aware because they're starting from a position where they know it's not a new film. So how they negotiate that self-awareness is really interesting. So I think part of that self-awareness is I'm not sure if it makes it easier on the audience. I think it's an attempt to sort of prove some kind of point to it existing. And, you know, and there's lots of reasons that people do reboots, and part of it is that it's cheap because you don't have to create a whole new intellectual property. But part of it is that culturally, you know, we live in a culture that is obsessed with the past. And now that we have digital storage and digital archives and whatnot, and Spotify for music and YouTube for videos and all that, we can just call up films whenever. You know, we're constantly enmeshed in our own past, so it's not surprising that the films are trying to sort of take what people want to watch and just make it a bit more sort of recent. But yeah, so I don't know if it makes it easier to watch, but I think it's a really interesting aspect to focus on in films. I think there's a lot of different strategies for self-awareness that films use. And again, I mean, I think it links to what Pop was talking about. I think when it's overtly, look at us, aren't we being funny, then it becomes a sort of bad camp. But there are other ways that self-awareness can take place. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that.
I was thinking, like, when a film is self-aware, actually it can be interpreted as more enjoyable, because, like, when someone someone looks at a movie, they think usually like, okay, this means something, like this stuff means something. But when a film is self-aware of itself, and then it makes like a lot of a little like inside jokes or whatever, then it gives like the spectator some sort of I don't know, maybe like a feeling of intelligence, I would say. And then you say, yeah, well, yeah, I got it, I got that. So it makes it more enjoyable and kind of like easier to connect the different dots in your process of interpreting it. And also, yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to say. I don't know if I wanted to say something else because I forgot.
I
But
would
yeah.
I would just add on that note. I think the best performance of self-awareness most recently. I don't know if people saw the TV series of Westworld a few years ago. And it's not quite horror, but because it played with self-awareness for those who had seen the original film by doing things like starting with recreating kind of the start of the park with someone going and visiting the park, focusing on the hands, because in the original film they couldn't do the hands properly, and this is how you told the androids apart from the humans. So they'd be focusing on the hands, but of course all the hands are perfect. So there's all this kind of knockback to the original film, only at the end to completely knock it all down and say, none of that's right. The person you thought was a guest is actually an android, and the person with great hands is actually an android, and all that sort of stuff. And I thought that was really great. Unfortunately, it all went off a bit when they made a second series, but I think that kind of self-awareness is hugely interesting and added to the suspense and the the shock and awe of it.
Okay, I think we've reached.
Please.
Sure.
The last series was the worst. I think it's gonna be even worse in series 4, Westworld. But I think I wanted to say the best use of self-awareness I've ever seen in a movie was in a movie that wasn't self-aware at first, and this was just this one motive. If you've seen the Funny Games, you might know what I'm talking about. The rewind scene. There's only this one self-aware scene, but it destroys the whole narrative. It changed what the whole movie is about. It was genius. That's all.
Okay, great. Very interesting discussion. We've reached the end of the of our session. Now it's time for a 10-minute break and another session with the title The Legacy of Eric Zahn, and the first presentation would be by Kamila Grabowska-Darletka, Monsters or Cyborgs, the Gender Aesthetic of the Contemporary Gothic Metal Musicians. So thanks for all the comments, questions, talks, and I hope we see each other again, perhaps on another event.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Is it online? Okay, so we're actually online now.
Online now. Okay, so
Amazing.
can we
Okay.
start now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. This section of PhilosophyCon. My name is Jakub Gomułka, and I'm going to chair this section. And the section name is the Legacy of Eric Zahn. And we have two speakers this section. The first one is Kamila Grabowska-Derlatka from Jagiellonian University. She is a cultural researcher and specializes in Gothic culture. Goth culture, or Gothic, right?
Love subculture, Gothic culture. It's both.
And she will present a paper titled "Monsters or Cyborgs: The Gender Aesthetics of the Contemporary Gothic Metal Musicians." And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jakub. I'm going to share the screen. I hope
Yeah, it's going.
Yeah. It's going. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kamila Grabowska-Derlatka. I'm from Jagiellonian University and the International Gothic Association, and I'm going to talk about the aesthetic of gender of the contemporary Gothic metal musicians. And my study I want to present was a comparative study in Europe and East Asia. So, first, I would like to acknowledge that when we think about musicians, especially Gothic, not especially Gothic musicians, but actually all of the musicians, the well-known musicians, we don't see only the music makers or the performers. We see some icons, we see idols, and we see the trendsetters. And that's why I wanted to at first, I wanted to research this field because I think when the person that is a musician sets some standards and trends, it inspires the whole culture or subculture to behave and dress in a certain way. And we see that's why I wanted to talk about. And that's why this musician and my study, these musicians and my study, I just made field about because a year I think ago or a year and a half ago. Starting with the words of Trevor Holmes, he says that goth is a gender perversion and indeed a pedagogy of gender transgression. So what is really important is that the aesthetic of gender in goth subculture and Gothic culture and Gothic-inspired narratives is very, very specific. And this is why I'm talking basically about gender today. The whole debate started with Donna Haraway, who didn't research Gothic, but she researched gender and she also researched a bit androgyny a bit. And in her famous Cyborg Manifesto from 1980s, she wrote that cyborg is a creature of a post-gender world. And she says that it's a complete, fulfilled creature. It's something that is happy by itself. It's just complete and doesn't need to be complete, fulfilled, and doesn't need to be completed by anything from the outside world, anything or anyone. She compared it to the Frankenstein's monster because she said that while the cyborg does not expect its father to save it through the restoration of the garden and the fabrication of a heterosexual mate, the Frankenstein's monster needs it to be completed because it's a patchwork creature that is not perfect, while the cyborg is perfect, happy and fulfilled. The Frankenstein's monster is always searching, always on the road to accomplish something more and needs to be fulfilled by a mate. After several years, Lauren Goodlatte, the Gothic researcher, famous Gothic researcher, cited Haraway, and she actually said that I don't want to emphasize that the subject of Goth-influenced narratives is not a creature of a post-gender world, not a creature of this perfect fantasy without gender and biological sex or anything, any categories like that. She says that the subject of a Goth-influenced narratives and Gothic culture is rather precisely like the Frankenstein's monster. It's this patchwork, incomplete fate. Actually, we need to also say something about Trevor Holmes, talking about the phenomenon of Gothicizing the gender. He says that we need to think of the word goth not as a noun, but rather as a verb, of goth as active, becoming either of straight singular gender norms. It's like the queer. It's like not the queer, but too queer. It's too goth. And the experimentation evoked by gothing in effect resists the attempts to make pure goth subjects. So the goth is only the horizon we want to go to, but we can never really accomplish that. We just have to see it as a horizon of our actions. And also, we can Gothicize our whole lives, but we can also Gothicize our gender, and this is very, very important for the Gothic artists. Actually, yeah, just to skim a bit through literature, we have talked about Trevor Holmes. He says he names the phenomenon of Gothicizing the gender, and he says that during this actions of Gothicizing, we are making not the gender-identified subject, but rather the goth-identified subject, because we have someone who is not a man or a woman, who is just goth, and this is more important than anything. We also have we said about Lauren Goodlatte. She describes the effects, she describes the Gothic androgyny and says that not the gender creatures in Gothic-inspired narratives are precisely like the Frankenstein's monster. And this is very important to remember the figure of the monster, because it's a patchwork. It's someone who is not male or female. It's not perfectly androgynous like the cyborg. It's a patchwork of different gender performatives. It's a patchwork of female, male, of femininity, masculinity, androgyny in the cyborg way. It's like a patchwork of every performative act you can just imagine. He can express every performative act just being itself, because he's patchwork. He's not like the perfect being like the cyborg. And also we need to say a bit about Judith Halberstam, because she created something she called female masculinity. Well, basically it was all about the masculinity being safe to perform both by men and women. She said that it's not something you have to be judged by if you are a woman and you behave masculine, or you're a male and you behave feminine. It's not something you have to be judged. You can be born in a certain body, but you just really can, and you really can feel safe to express any gender narrative or gender performative action. After just digging through this literature, this scientific literature, of course, the Frankenstein's monster model. So basically, the Frankenstein's monster model is genderless but non-sexless, while the cyborgs model is both genderless and sexless. So you don't really have a category of both gender and biological sex. Just something like that doesn't exist in a society that the cyborg is into. The cyborg doesn't really need a society, but who needs the society is the Frankenstein's monster, and he really needs to find a safe space for itself to express any gender performative acts it wants to express. So it's non-sexless and genderless, but there are also gender characterized performative acts and elements, such as feminine and masculine, as I told before, like Judith Halberstram wrote about. While the cyborgs model has none of that, because there is no any just category of gender performative acts, gender and biological sex or anything. And the Frankenstein's monster model is something that builds this safe ground for everyone to express femininity, masculinity, and other gender performative acts, regardless of their biology. While there's nothing like that in the cyborgs model. And also, the Frankenstein's model has something that is called goticizing or queering the gender. So those acts can undergo, while in the cyborgs model and Guy Robin's model, there are no acts like goticizing or queering the gender, because there is basically like no gender. Okay, so my aim of this whole research was to see which of the models of androgyny is the most adequate within the Gothic metal musicians today, and just to see how the Gothic metal musicians perform their gender in their artistic performances, like on stage or on videos and stuff like that. So just to quickly tell you what I did. My study was based in a constructive paradigm, and I made it a qualitative study rather than a quantitative study, because I really wanted for it to be very specific. I first analyzed the aesthetic manifestations of the musicians, like concerts, videos, photos, social media posts, and all that. And second, I just made some deepened interviews about those manifestations. I made them with the musicians themselves, and I made them also with their managers and booking agents. So basically, the musicians, their agents, and their managers, they were from Europe and from Asia. They were divided into groups, Europe and East Asia. And I used open coding and then compared the literature, the scientific literature, just in the very last part to the outcomes of my research, because I really wanted to be objective about that. So the results are they're really surprising, because I can show you this in the table. The yellow ones are the outcomes that are strictly about gender. So the European Gothic musicians goticize both everyday life and artistic manifestations. So there is not really that diversion of on-stage and off-stage life, not really that diversion of the performance and their everyday life, like personal life. But for East Asian musicians,
The time.
Okay, just 3 minutes. Okay, so for East Asian musicians, there is a very strong difference about it. And they really divert their personal lives and on-stage image. For the European Gothic musicians, they prefer gender binary roles. And that's really what surprised me. So they are not really androgynous, and they are goticizing this in a Victorian-inspired gender binary ways. While for the East Asian musicians, androgyny is popular. And yeah, this is something about mixing masculinity, femininity, and regardless of their biological sex. Music, image, and performance is really strongly bound together for them. And so to say, actually, European Gothic musicians are expressing their goth gender identity, they're gothicizing their gender in a binary way, inspired strongly by the Victorian era, while East Asian musicians are turned out to be androgynous, just in a model of the Frankenstein monster, and they do it mainly on stage. So just to conclude, first conclusion is that Eastern Asian musicians gothicize their gender in the monster or model of a Frankenstein's monster, while the Europeans stick to gender binary roles and aesthetics. And conclusion two is that for Eastern Asian musicians, the life on stage and off stage is completely different, while for the European musicians, it's not really that diverted. It's kind of similar. So, thank you for your attention. They do it mainly on stage.
Thank you very much for
Is
your
that
presentation.
for
And now we will have Michaela Funco from Romania, from Babeș-Bolyai University. And she is a philosopher working in applied philosophy and also in philosophy of music. And her presentation, I just closed will deal with those topic, but I'm sorry, I don't have the name of your presentation here. I mistakenly closed the program. So the floor is yours, and please start with the name of your presentation if you wish. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful event. And I will share my screen to show first the name of the presentation and everything else. And please, 5 minutes before the time is off, please let me know, because when I talk, I tend to talk as a teacher too much. Although I tried to keep it minimal for this presentation, then you will not have too much information on it, because I wanted to be open to the topic that I'm going to address, which is how singing about failure can save the world. And the topic that I'm going to address is through the lenses of the music of several bands that I'm going to talk a little bit more later. So about the plan of my presentation, I will talk a little bit about the way we approach sad music and failure, and the difference that we do this in music compared to our daily lives. Then I will approach the songs of My Chemical Romance, a band that could easily be, at least at their first or second stage, swiped in the presentation of my colleague for their aesthetic, at least. And I will talk how they attempted to change the world through changing the language and the hearts of their fans. Then in the second part, I will talk about the music and lyrics of Frank Aiero, one of the members of my camp, who also had a couple of other musical projects, side projects on his own. Then I will try to connect them by mentioning the topic of authenticity. That is a kind of a red line connecting all the dots. And I hopefully will manage to end before my allotted time. So about failure and sad music. Normally in life, we attempt to stay away from failure as much as possible. And if we can make a link between failure and death, as usually we do, we can say that failure is the most close approximation to death. And we, as beings, as Heidegger would say, would try to stay away from that, from the mere thought of dying. We try as much as we can to stay away from failure. If this is true for the majority of us, and if we try as much as we can to avoid failure in our daily lives, in our holidays, in our courses, in our presentations, then why do we derive aesthetic pleasure from listening to sad music, such as the music from the lyrics of this song, from my camp, Desert Song, where you can read for yourself. The topic of dying and of failure is very much woven into the architecture of that song. There are a couple of theories that try to explain why we like sad music and why, contrary to our daily lives, we surround ourselves with sounds of songs that speak about death, about failure, about vampires, about other different bleak topics. And the bands that I've chosen are provoking songs that speak are offering a kind of a case study for this analysis. So I've written a couple of articles at the Review of Applied Philosophy, Revista de Filosofia Aplicată, a journal of our department that we cheerfully would like to offer for everybody. It's an open access journal, and we try to include in it topics from popular culture and philosophy as often as we can. So in several articles that I published in that journal, I try to analyze first the songs of My Chemical Romance, and in my article I started from the kind of natural observation that if you see them, if you watch them over time, you can, as you can see from the images that I included, their image changed a lot. So change is kind of a constant in their music, in their style, and in their appearances. What does not change is the type of the lyrics that abounds in issues as such as death, guns, weapons, bullets. That's the title of their first album. So that kind of universe does not change, but their attitude, their outward body performance changes a lot. So how are they making this possible? How is change a constant and at the same time something that managed to get avoided? And secondly, how did they have such an impact among their fans? I analyzed several theories, and the first of them is the fact that they managed to change the world of their fans through a kind of a change of language. They proposed, by using all the emotional topics that I mentioned before and all the bleak topics that I mentioned before, they offered a kind of a code for their fans to be able to be recognized and to be able to use those words as a code, in order to be recognized among themselves. When one says, "I'm not okay," they are clearly making a reference to one of their most well-known anthem. When one say the Black Parade, they again can refer to one of the most well-known anthems of that band. And the fans recognize themselves on Instagram, on Facebook, on social networks, on Reddit pages. They instantly recognize by using these concepts, these metaphors, and they managed to establish a sort of communication among themselves by using these words that the band kind of consecrated. But how is this working? How is this making any sense? One philosopher who offered a kind of an explanation to the way language works by providing us a kind
vampires,
of a safe space
about
where
other
we can establish our theories, establish our identities, is
and the bands that I found of songs that speak are offering a kind of a case study for this analysis.
The examples.
So I've written a couple of articles
the Greek
at the Review of Applied Philosophy, Revista de Filosofia Applicata,
who also built this
journal
kind
of our department that we carefully
inside the language and
cheerfully
then to the outer world.
Would like
and
to
what my camp is doing
offer
is the same
for
thing.
everybody.
And
it's an
also
open access journal.
Many other
and
well-known bands.
We try to include in it topics from popular culture and philosophy
kind of
as often as we can.
These words.
So
and to,
in several articles that I published in that journal, I try to analyze first the songs of
in the outer world
My Chemical
or
Romance,
in the connected world.
And in my article, I start
these
second,
words.
so in
several
articles that I published in that journal, I try to analyze first
places, not by
the signs of
the outer world
My Chemical Romance, and in my article, I start
criticized
so in several articles that I published.
And this is because their
place is
not
by the size
from their outfits and from their makeup, that they are using their bodies as well as their lyrics to overtly express their emotions. And we are talking about strong emotions here. To explain how is this working for their fans, we can, of course, refer to the well-known cathartic theory of Aristotle, and Aristotle didn't talk about my camp, he talked about Greek tragedy, but the process is quite similar. And we can talk about a two-way cathartic process. First, the members of the band are kind of distilling their experiences in the format of their songs, and they are doing everything that they can to talk about things that are relevant for their audience. So they are talking about, they are singing about drugs, about weapons, about depression, about all the troubles that their audience is most likely facing. And then in the second phase, the audience gets this lyric broadcasted loudly around, go to the concerts, sings together with the others, and what they do is that they kind of manage to express their own fears, their own problems, their own troubles by getting the sign that their heroes understand them. They have passed through the same things, so they can express it again in a very safe space. So this is what I've done in the first article. Just the basics of it. And in the second article, I tried to analyze a little bit the songs and work of Frank Aero, one of the members of my camp, who also has a lot of side projects, musical projects. He was member in more than 5 or 6 different bands. At one moment, he would change the name of the band with the next album that he would release. And again, as in the case of my camp, change is what is constant throughout his career. But what he also touches upon in his songs and in his musical projects is that very deep connection between failure, something that he is not shy to mention and to think about, and creativity. And that connection, that missing link between failure and creativity, is the fact that when we fail, when we acknowledge the fact that we fail, and when we take that, distill that experience and transform it into, again, songs, into art projects, into whatever else crosses our minds, we are offering our fans a way to, for them, again, to be aware that there is more to failure than meet the eyes. As Costică Brădățan, a Romanian theorist who works in the States, tells us, philosophy is a space, is the perfect space for failure. Because if you study the history of philosophy, you can see that each philosopher, each well-known philosopher, builds upon the failed system of the philosopher who preceded him or her. Each of them is trying to make something new, to criticize what the others have done, maybe wrongly, and to propose a new version. And in this respect, philosophers and musicians are very much alike. They try to use failure, they try to use these negative emotions and impulses in a way that emphasizes creativity and that makes us be better persons that we were one day before. And 5 minutes, great. So that was the topic of my second article, and what I wanted to add for this presentation is that what represents a kind of a common thread between the first example and the second example is the notion of authenticity. That by using, on the one hand, a certain language, a certain type of changing of hearts, by mentioning emotions, and by using these references to failure, all these musicians attempt to establish a connection to their true selves. They are trying to expose themselves as authentic, as being themselves, as being who they are. And as they say in their interviews, you don't have to be afraid to be weird, to be different from the others, because there is only one true self that is you. So what they try to do, and again, this I think contributes a lot to their impact and to their image among their fans, and to all the involvement and engagement that their fans are following them, is the fact that they are perceived to be their true selves. And of course, I will not enter into details, but probably when I will write a new piece about this, I will get into more details. Philosophy has a lot to tell us about authenticity. The fact that they are perceived to be their true selves, and of course, has a lot to tell us about what being authentic really means, and how by being authentic, we are also being more free and more true to ourselves. So I will just give you the links of my articles that I was mentioning, and I hope that many of you will take this presentation as a kind of an invitation to contribute to our future issues to Revista de Filosofia Aplicata. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And well, the first thing I would like to ask is if the both of speakers have any questions to each other. I can't see any question here.
Well, actually, it's I just saw that we both talked about special kind of safe spaces, like in both in music. For me it was in performance of gender, but for Michaela it was about authenticity in the lyrics of the songs. So yeah.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say that many of, at least the former performances of my camp are very much into the aesthetic of what you are saying, and that there is a journalist named Craig Shuftan who wrote a book about my camp, and he tries to establish various connections and to explain their impact as being connected to romanticism. And of course, God is a big part of romanticism. So I was really pleased with the way that you started your that presentation kind of complemented what I wanted to say. And also an interesting aspect of their performances, at least during their first 2 stages of their career, they kind of they had regarding the main aspect of your presentation, during their gender. They kind of they also wanted to have safe spaces for their fans at their concerts, especially in regard to gender, because they took equality of genders very seriously. And they also tried to provoke by, for instance, performing acts such as gay stage. They kissed each other on stage, both of them being males. So they did a lot to kind of provoke the audience to be more tolerant and more inclusive to that kind of experience, and to have the experience of concert going as being a safe one for everybody, regardless of their gender.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask Mateusz Sawczyn if there is any question from chat, from the outside chat. But I can't see any reaction. So there are no questions on the chat, yeah? So there are no questions and comments.
Okay, so yeah, well, if you have any questions, you can ask in the YouTube chat. Any listeners can ask. And maybe Jakub, you have some questions.
Yeah, I think I can form a question to both of you. I think about the situation of non-binary people within this aesthetics.
Aspect of
about those? I think about comments.
Yeah, basically, androgyny
experience
is
for everybody, regardless of their gender.
Well, I cannot say
androgyny is something a bit different. Okay, thank you. Binary, I would like to ask Mateusz Sawczyn if there is any question from
come up with those 3 models of androgyny. Because
from chat,
for example,
from the outside chat.
Faraway, it would be something different.
I can't see any
Lauren Goodlad. For Goodlad, it's a mixture of those gender performatives. And when we say about non-binary people, I think androgyny.
There are no questions on the chat, yeah?
This kind of situation I talked about in goth support. Okay, so yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask in the YouTube chat. Really, the aspect of androgyny in this culture can make really what we actually talked about, this safe space for non-binary people to express themselves and to like be not feel judged about how they look or how they perform.
Okay, and what about you, Michaela?
Well, if I describe the aesthetic of the bands, I would probably at some point, I think they were more close to androgyny. At least the main their lead performer Gerard Way would appear on stage on outfits that would be close to what Camilla would call androgynous, than non-binary. And I think that what you also said about androgyny as being different from non-binary is very relevant, because androgyny literally means men and women, and non-binary means it can be neither, can be both, can be a combination, can be many things. I'm not sure about how the bands would relate to this issue, but I know that their at least philosophy for the people attending their concerts would be of inclusiveness and tolerance, and I guess that would include everybody, including non-binary persons.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's the question I had. Do you have any other comments? Because we simply 2 minutes after the beginning of the question section, according to the program, and we have 18 minutes to spend. I don't know what to ask more.
You can talk.
You can start talking about it, but well, if there are no other comments or questions, we just can extend the break, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
you can start talking about it, but
just to maybe finish because I don't see anything on the chat either. So I just wanted to say that I talked about Gothic metal. Michaela talks about a very iconic emo band. It's nice to see that both of those aesthetics are kind of similar, but also they are similar in their inclusiveness, and that is what might make their fans feel really accepted and feel like free to express themselves. And that is what I really love about music, especially that kind of rock, not only rock, but metal and emo rock music.
Okay, I have a question, actually. You both talked about the inclusiveness of musical world, but can you imagine, or can you give examples of something quite opposite? I mean, the musical environment, or even genres that are non-inclusive, that are directed on the opposite side. I mean, on the opposite part of this dichotomy. That is the music and musical culture, musical subculture that is disclosed to and is bound to certain non-tolerant threads of culture.
I don't know if we can generalize, if we can say that a whole genre of music is non-tolerant. I think that there are cases and cases, but any type of music, band, project that attempts to, promote themselves as very stereotypical, either masculine or feminine, hard masculine, building, bike, how do you say, when you are a motorbiker? Yeah, bikers, okay. But the hard one with the, leather jackets and muscles and lots of naked girls around. So anything that attempts to establish themselves as stereotypically masculine or feminine would more likely become, or at least their fandom, become more intolerant towards what is different. Any kind of project that is not that stereotypical, that is kind of more fluid in their appearance, in their music, that changes a lot, for instance, that is not fixed, may incline and may require and may encourage their fandom to be more inclusive and more tolerant. That is my kind of perspective from outside.
Okay, thank you very much. Kamila, can you add something to that?
Yeah, I think, well, as you may know, I'm somewhere in between two subcultures, the Gothic subculture, the goth subculture, and the metal subculture, because I play a certain type of music, and I'm also interested in both of those. Actually, there was a reason why I switched mostly to the goth subculture rather to metal, because metal in Poland is somehow, it's funny to say conservative, but it's actually not that inclusive. I mean, for example, when you are new to goth subculture, when you're young and just exploring this world, you are being called the baby butt, and everybody wants you to know more, and they are very protective of you, and they want you to have some more knowledge and more dig into this style of goth and this lifestyle in general. But in metal subculture, we have some people who really say that it's not true for the new members, or they are like kinto metals, especially in Poland. So also we have some metal genres that I don't really like National Socialist black metal. I mean, that is something that is really not inclusive, like in the definition of it. So yeah, I think metal is evolving, and I really hope that it is becoming more and more inclusive. I can see it, but I hope it becomes more inclusive, like in the years that will pass. But as I grew up, I could see less of inclusiveness in the metal community than in the goth community. So that is something I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you very much. I was wondering during your answers if one can pose a thesis that the music itself, no matter of a genre, is in a way is a force inclining to inclusiveness, but maybe this thesis is too far. I understand that, because I wonder about it because of the ending of your answer, that you hope for the better metal, and so. Does it mean that the subculture of metal is able to transform itself into something more inclusive? And
yeah, I think it's becoming more and more inclusive. I think it's really just it's becoming more inclusive, and it's let's say growing up in this trend. So I think it really can do more. In Poland, Polish community is very, very special, very specific. And when we went with my band somewhere abroad, we could see that the metal community was really much more inclusive than it is in Poland. So I think it's just a matter of time, and yeah, the metal would be a better metal. More inclusive.
Okay, so my question is, does it have any? Is it connected with the music itself, or rather the culture that surrounds it? I mean, our culture. I mean, the culture of the Western Hemisphere. I believe and hope becomes more and more inclusive. So this is how I perceive it now, and of course this process have an impact on musical subcultures, and this is the one process. But I wondered if there is any other. I mean, if there is a process that results from the music itself, like if there is a potential in every musical genre to be more tolerant by means of the music as a force, maybe quasi-metaphysical force of liberating and transgressing. That was the key of my question. That was the core of it. Can you tell something about that?
So maybe if I can start. I think that there is something in the core of goth subculture itself that makes inclusivity much more popular in this area, because goth wasn't at first about music, because at first the Gothic culture was about literature, it was about fashion, and then like in about 1970s, 1980s, like 100 years after it all began, or even more, we had this boom of Gothic rock, Gothic metal, death rock. We had different in 1990s and the 2000s. We had some Gothic synthwave, some electronic music. Because, what is Gothic music in general, or goth music in general? It's the music that goths listen to, and goths listen to very different kinds of music. And goths are also very inclusive in their community, like as a subculture. So they do not stick to just a few aesthetics. They incorporate different aesthetics in their culture in general. So that is why maybe the music community is also much more inclusive. And for metal, there was also this notion of being a true metalhead, this truthness. And I think it's what sometimes might block the inclusiveness, but it's changing right now. So I guess it's okay. Maybe Michaela, you'd like to add something.
Thanks, Michaela.
At your question, thank you. And I don't know. I can't put my finger. I believe both theses could be argued successfully. I mean, defended. The first one, that music is by the way of its proper language, by the way it can be played. It's inclusive, it's a universal language, you don't need words to understand, you can express emotions, so it's universal. But if that is the case, then why isn't it become more inclusive, I don't know, from 3,000 years, 4,000 years since we have music? So I think culture and politics also play a part, and if our Western culture is shifting towards being more diverse and more inclusive as a matter of collective decision, that would influence and impact the music as well, which is gonna be more. So I'm undecided.
Okay, thank you very much for your both answers. If there is,
there are some questions. I don't know if you can see them.
Okay, so can you pass me the question?
So how does Gothic music fit into the aesthetics of horror? That's one of them. Can you see the chat, by the way, or not?
Yeah, I'm seeing this on my phone.
I can't see the chat.
So maybe Camilla could read the questions since she sees them anyway.
Okay, well, how does it fit the aesthetics of horror? Well, I think it's really bound to the culture. Music itself is bound to the Gothic culture, like in general, which is a really big cultural movement, and a very long one. So basically, we can see some aesthetic manifestations that come from the Gothic genre on stage or in the videos, music videos, or even in the lyrics of the music. But what I think it's like we need to see the wider picture. The wider picture shows us that Gothic legacy was always bound to horror narratives, because Gothic novels, like the first thing that was really stated as Gothic, like, or maybe even not the architectural neo-Gothic movement or Gothic revival, but well, the Gothic. Let's talk about the text. Yeah, we have Gothic novels, and Gothic novels were basically like somehow connected to the horror stories. They were like the pre-horror stories, let's call it. So that's how the both aesthetics of Gothic and of horror, they evolved together, and they were mixing towards each other. Yeah, they were influencing each other. So also the music, I think it's being influenced by this whole cultural movement of both horror and Gothic. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we are approaching the end of our session. It's just 2 minutes, but if there are no other questions, we can end as well at this point of time.
Actually, there's one other question I think we could ask.
Oh, so
do you think the goth culture might be nearing an end, or at least steep decline, like punk, for example?
Can you repeat it, because I cannot see it? Can you repeat?
Do you think the goth culture might be nearing an end, or at least steep decline, like the punk culture, for example?
Oh no, goth is usually called the undead subculture, because it lasts very, very long. And what I can see is because of this inclusiveness and liveliness, it's changing, it's evolving, but there is no certain like downfall of the culture. Yes, Michaela?
Can I add something? Punk is definitely not dead. We are, there is I don't know if you know about the Popular Culture and Philosophy series from Open Court, now migrated to Karus Books. They are going to have a new book on punk and philosophy. So contributions are expected this summer, I think, and the whole volume is going to be published at the end of this year. And if something enters philosophy, then that thing will definitely not die. So.
Okay.
Punk's not dead.
Punk's not dead. I believe the intention behind the question was that there was a time where punk culture was very lively and quite visible, but now it's rather not. And
I know. I wanted to make a joke. Sorry.
Yeah. So is there? But of course. There's a byword that there's nothing that can die in culture. But what about the possibility of decline of certain trends in culture? For instance, the decline of goth culture. That's the possibility, I believe.
Yeah, it might be, but also what is important to notice is that Goth subculture and Gothic culture entered the area of the mainstream. It entered the mainstream sitcoms like about the Addams Family. Maybe it entered the popular some TV shows and animated TV shows. We have some Gothic characters there. We have some Goths, and of course, it's like not really authentic, but there is something about Goth aesthetic, maybe not the culture in the whole, but the aesthetic that is all kind of interesting for the mainstream audience. So I think that maybe it might evolve a bit, but yeah, we really don't. We cannot see. I personally cannot see the vision that Goth might be decline, like in few years.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer, and I believe this is the time we have to end our session. Thank you, thank both of you for your contributions, for your papers and the contribution to the discussion. And this was the real pleasure to take part in it. So thank you very much thank you to the audience for listening to us, and goodbye, and we have a break now. Bye.
Just one final note from me. There are some unanswered questions still, but you can try to answer them on the chat. Both speakers. We don't want to leave the viewers unsatisfied, right? So feel free to engage via our chat.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm leaving the space now.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Okay. So, good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and others. My name is Kamila Grabowska-Derlatka. I am from the Jagiellonian University, and I would be the chair of the section. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and others. I have with me Luz Ascarte from the University of Paris, Pantheon 1 Sorbonne, and she would talk about the radical other in the X-Men universe, an ontological and phenomenological approach. So, Luz, the floor is yours. Please start your presentation.
Thank you so much, Camila. My English is not so fluid. I'm so sorry. I will make my best. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for allowing me to present this reflection on X-Men in this great event, which is about horror. Somehow, I believe that the image of the mutant, of the strange, of the different, is intertwined with the horror that Lovecraft has inherited for us. Before I begin my philosophical approach, I will say just a few words about the X-Men universe itself. The X-Men universe appeared in 1963, created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. This universe is made up of humans and mutants. The mutant is someone that have had a genetic mutation, that has suffered a genetic mutation, and therefore she or he has a kind of superpowers. In fact, this idea was inspired by the DC comic Doom Patrol, a group of misfits or freak superheroes. As them, mutants are marginalized, and not every mutant has a strong power. Some of their powers are just weird. Anyway, as the books, the TV series, the films, the video games about this story show us, there is a certain intensity that this universe continues to convey to us. More than half a century after its creation, my hypothesis is that what this series conveys to us is a metaphysical truth that runs through our human constitution and which we approach with the expression of radical order. This metaphysical truth is as well shared by horror stories, if you would like to talk about it in the discussion time. So my presentation about the radical order in X-Men will be divided into three parts. Firstly, from a political social level, the order will be just the mutant for the human being and the human being for the mutant. But this first level will give place to another radical level, a phenomenological level, since each individual, a human being or mutant, recognizes in himself traits of the other group. This phenomenological otherness that lives on in the heart of each individual can get out of control. Otherness as uncontrolled, a theme of psychoanalysis and phenomenology will be understood here as the cosmic background from which all subjectivity emerges. At this point, the category of the radical order will be inserted in a cosmic level that I will call an ontological one. In this level, the radical order will not simply be the mutant or the human being, but a transversal category that enables the constitution of all subjectivity in from our world. This level will show an original conflict between two forces, a cosmological one and anthropological one. So I start with the first level. The notion of the other appears from a very explicit level on a social political field. Humans and mutants, as we see in the films, in the series, in the comics, in the video games of X-Men, cohabit the same social sphere. But lots of tensions arise when humans get aware of the existence of mutants. Humans fear that mutants' excessive power will result in the extinction of humanity, the existence of mutants. So some organizations, some institutions appear with the aim of transforming mutants, making them normal. Other organizations prefer to lock them out. The repressive forces of the state, and it's amazing because we can see a president, always a president, that in the series of the 19th was a woman. There was a woman president of the United States, but we can always see a president that appears in as representation of this repressive force, and the repressive forces are ready to guide the dangerous mutants back to normality or to kill them. Technology appears here as a kind of human institutional superpower. We can also lose control, as we can see in the Sentinel series of X-Men, that was one of the first comic series of X-Men, and that will have after their own comic stories, the Sentinels. The Sentinels are a kind of huge robots programmed to identify and kill mutants, but we can see in the Sentinels story that in our world we have also a kind of technological superpower that can be dangerous for the others, and the other can be another human, but also nature. On the mutant side, there is one group represented by Magneto. This group feels itself in a repressive human society, and they want to dominate humans. This group of mutants believe that their otherness, their internal otherness, is actually a sign of the evolution of life. So it's an ethical decision to kill humans. But there is also a resentment reaction to human institutional repression in this part. But there's another part of the mutant, and another part that is more complex. This other part is represented by the X-Men. this other part help the repressive forces that try to calm all excesses in the social political space. And these excesses can come from the human sphere or from the mutant sphere. It is this vision of the other as a part of oneself that constitutes the vision of Professor X and of his followers. It is this complex and constitutive vision of the other that exists the purely social or political realm. I mean, we can give political and social arguments for understand the position of the state, the position of repressive forces, the position of Magneto. But we can just give political and social arguments for understand the position of the X-Men or the position of Professor X. We have to give another kind of arguments for understand its position. Because the position of the X-Men is not part of an external perspective. The position of the X-Men emerged from an individual perspective. And there is why this position allows us to radicalize the notion of the other and to jump into a phenomenological level. So the second part of this presentation is consecrated to this second level, the phenomenological level in which appears the radical other. As we know, the X-Men seek to protect the inhabitants of Earth, humans and mutants, from injustice and violence. In that sense, the story of the X-Men is also a superhero story. But this is possible because they recognize in themselves human and mutant traits that make them feel parts of the same humanity, a conception that is defended by Professor X, but also from the other mutants that are close to him. From a phenomenological point of view, and in this, I follow closely the reflections of Emil Husserl, published in his Metaphysical Meditations. The other is constitutive of oneself, at such an elementary level that even in the passive strata of our experience, we find otherness. But also in the descriptive level, that is the phenomenological level. A phenomenological level is the level of the description. The other appears as the differentiation between someone who perceives and someone who describes perception. So there's a radical other point out by the phenomenological method that has as result the co-participation of oneself and otherness in every strata of our experience, even when we describe our experience. A radical perspective then does not see the other as what only manifests itself in psychophysical subjects, I mean in other person, in other mutant, but as part of what constitutes the selves. This phenomenological perspective allows us to establish an anonymous otherness that inhabits each individual and that can't get out of control. Professor X and his institute seeks to teach control of one's own powers, to humanize the moderations that inhabit us. And more than in other superhero series, here each superpower also represents great damage when it is uncontrolled. For example, in the case of Rogue, she can even totally annihilate whoever she touches if she touches her or him for too long. But she also has the power to control this excess of her own power, which is very difficult for her. She has to learn how to control it. But in some places of the X-Men universe, she achieves to control this power. So she can, for example, kiss Gambit in several times. So love appears, love can be possible in her life when she can control this power. Wolverine also has a superpower that represents damage, but in this case, for his own body. But the great example about this uncontrolledness is the case of the Phoenix. What the Phoenix that invades Jean Grey, or Marvel Girl, that is also Professor X model student, teach us is in this sense that there is a part of all of us that we do not control and that we can't control. Sigmund Freud's practice of psychoanalysis is based on this pulsional part, which we can't penetrate through analysis. And in some of the scenes in which Professor X talks with this part of Jean Grey, we find a similarity with psychoanalysis. And in this perspective, psychoanalysis is very close to Edmund Husserl's analysis of passive genesis. It would seem, however, that the problem of the psyche, whether from the phenomenological or from the psychoanalytical point of view, and as enclosing the radical orders in interiority. But the acts of the Phoenix do not simply have internal repercussions. They are, as the greatest image of the comics, of the animated series, or of the films show us, with the great image of the Phoenix, when the Phoenix is liberated, we can see, in fact, that the problem of the Phoenix is not an internal problem, it's a cosmic problem. The Phoenix, when get out of control, goes beyond the person of Jean Grey or Marvel Girl and takes place in a deep dimension where her inner self is linked to the outer whole, which is why she's so powerful. We can see that there's a kind of cosmic power there in the image of the Phoenix. It's not just the unconscious part of Jean Grey that gets uncontrolled. It's something cosmic that's happening. So the image of the Phoenix allow us to talk about the third level, that is the cosmic one. this image, first of all, leads us to think of Merleau-Ponty's great order. Merleau-Ponty's great order is not simple a person or a part of us, but the world as a whole. Merleau-Ponty thinks that this first great order, that is the world, appears in our conscious of our mother when we are babies. When we see our mother, we discover for him this great order. But it is not because all our problems are caused by our relation with our mother. That would be the perspective of Freud. For him, is because the mother represents the whole, the world as a whole. And this radical order is not simply a person, is the world as a whole that contains us, but make us suffer too. Precisely for Eugene Minkowski, our constitution, what makes us human, can be understood as having originated in an anthropo-cosmic conflict, not in internal conflicts, but in an anthropo-cosmic conflict. The radical order can be thus understood here on a very ontological level. The order is not just the mutant or the part of the mutant in a human being, but a transversal ontological category that constitutes all existing life. If by life we understand the dynamism of all that exists, the cosmic dynamism that's shape in everything. The radical order, as we find it in X-Men, unveils a metaphysical truth, a fundamental truth, the fact that all subjectivity arises from an original conflict between an unifying force and a divided force. Minkowski distinguishes here between man and women and the human as two categories that are not just different but opposed. We are women or men for him when we live in uncontrol, in thoughtlessness, in immoderation, in the cosmic mass in which we are pulsions and desires. But we are humans when we can thought about our difference, when we can reflect on our difference, our otherness, and surpass the man or women in each of us. There is no personality in man or women, but there is a personality when we are human, when we are human beings. We are different and we are personalized. To be a mutant, it's to be a man or to be a woman. It's to inhabit this sphere of uncontrolled pulsions. But to be an X-man, and here the X, it's important, to be an X-man is to go beyond being a simple mutant, a simple man or a simple woman, and to awaken to the dynamic conflict that inhabits us. That is for Minkowski, art and ethics, but we can also set fiction in general, and every artistic expression allow us to reach the human that we are, allow us to surpass this psychophysical determination of mass and achieve the human that we are. This seems to be also the teaching that gives us Professor X when in the first episode of the comic book The X-Men in 1963, Xavier explains that he called his students the X-Men because they possess an extra power that allows them to be more than simple men, to achieve this sphere of the human. This extra power is not, we believe, a psychophysical ability, and that is why there are mutants that has more powers than the others, mutants that has just a different color of eyes, and that is all. It's not just a psychophysical ability, but the transcendental possibility of self-control, of self-recognition as difference. We therefore understand that in X-Men, some mutants are more humans than some women and some men in the series. And in this perspective, we believe that we are all women, men, and mutants, but we can all be human beings, X-Men, in the sense of this philosophical truth of this universe. Thank you so much. I think that is all that I have to say about this.
Okay, wow, thank you very much. So yeah, we don't have our another guest, so we'll just start the discussion now, if that's okay for you. Yeah, I'm just really happy that you talked about the matter of the mutants and of superpowers, because I'm also really interested in the phenomenon that is in general called the superpower shaming. And I think the mutants are like, really a special kind of the superhumans or super entities, let's call it, called the superpower shaming. They are basically they can basically show our fears from the science, our traumas connected to somehow the science and how it can go beyond our control.
Yes, that's right. I believe that in a psychical sense, everybody is a mutant, because we cannot set that there's a rule for dispositions of desires or for internal pulsions. So we found a lot of particularities, internal particularities that in the history of psychology or the history of medicine, we have called them with different names of that change every time, different names of psychological problems. Mm-hmm. But I think that if there's are psychological problems, everybody has it, because everybody has an amount of desires, emotions that responds, I guess, to a cosmic disorder of life. Life is never static, it's always changing, and there is in life lots of confusion and lots of fusion between different elements. And I believe that in our constitution, we have this the representation of this cosmic amounts of elements. If we analyze, for example, the religions books from, I don't know, the books of the Sutra, the Hinduism, or the Jedi, or the Oriental religions, we found always a way to understand our interiority linked to cosmic elements. Mm-hmm. Cosmic elements that are always in disorder. But in science we found explanations that are more fixed and are more disconnected. In Occidental science, we found some explanations that are more disconnected of this cosmic level. And I believe that if we think about mutants or about superpowers in general, we can find an explanation of something that is truth in our feelings, something that is true and that we cannot explain with simple science.
Okay, we have something on the chat. Oh yeah, we have many of them. Okay, so first question is otherness gradable according to the presented concept? Is it something gradable?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Is otherness gradable? Yes. In the concept that you presented? Would you does it have some levels or
of otherness?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that there's a different kind of otherness in the point of view of description. And in the point of view of ontology, I think there is always one element and another, just two, like binary radical otherness that we can find it in lots of manifestations of our social imaginary in general. But in the descriptive level, we can find different structures to approaching this otherness, like a really elementary level that would be the level of political, of social, or maybe in a kind of scientific empirical level. We found another psychological level that is more complex, and in which otherness is not just someone, but
so love in X-Men universe depends on suspension of power. That crossed my mind when you talked about Rouge and Gambit, but it's actually what happens between other characters. So
thank you so much. I think that in Rogue, love could be realized even if there's a imaginary level before the realization of love, but love can't be actualized, can be effective when she can't control her own power. But we have also, for example, the case of Jean Grey and Cyclops and Wolverine. There's another case. In this case, for example, Wolverine loves Jean Grey, and it's a love, a kind of platonic love that can't be real because she loves Cyclops. And in this love, in the love of Cyclops and Jean Grey, there is a control in Jean, but not in Cyclops, because his power is a power in which he can damage the other person when he uses it. But Jean Grey, yes, she has to control his power of read minds, and he has to control this phoenix that she has. And I think that X-Men shows lots of the problem about power and love that we can find in real life. Sometimes love can't be possible only when we control ourselves. And sometimes love can't be possible even when we control ourselves. It can't be possible because there's just a part of this a binomic relation that wants to get the step of loving each other and the other no. Mm-hmm. But I think that yes, in lots of the stories that we see, there is something that we have to control in X-Men for loving.
Okay, we have also another question from Piotr Zając. It would be a pattern showing us basics of social bonding and suspension of destructive forces, and we withdraw ourselves, creating a space for the other. So it's just his point of view, I guess. Do you agree?
Yeah, yes, I agree. I think in love, but in general, in every relation, even in our relations with other beings that are not just simply humans, like our relations with animals or with plants or with humans that are not our family or our lover. There's something about controls that we have to learn to create peace for living. And I think that is something that has to be practiced with lots of self-determination. And I think that in this case, X-Men teach us a lot about humanity and the problems that we can find today because we can't control ourselves as a nation, as a group, as a person, as a species. I believe is.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for the answer. We have. You talked about Doom Patrol, and I'm also a fan of Doom Patrol, and we have a question about Doom Patrol from our friend. Yeah, have you seen the Doom Patrol series? And could you say how you view Danny the Street in the light of what you've discussed, or maybe Dorothy?
Yes, I think that Doom Patrol, in fact, is the authentic story about how to be different in a world that wants to make us normal. And what it is interested in Doom Patrol is that their powers or their difference make us laugh when we think about it. It's not like in X-Men that there's some of them that make us laugh, but the other that have more mainstream powers. In Doom Patrol is like a story about how people that are really marginalized, that can be understood as strong, could manage a life and could make even good to other people, and could show themselves in a way as they have to learn this self-determination, not only for control their powers, but also for accept herself, accept themselves in general. And in this sense, I believe that these personages show us how to manage the humanized version of us in this world. Because in this world, we have lots of structures that want to homogenize us, that want to make us as everybody in this world. But Doom Patrol show us that to being the human that we are, we don't have to just control, but also accept. And I think that this is really interesting, and is another kind of otherness, maybe more radical in the psychological level than X-Men.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we have also another question. What do you think about parallel between X-Men and Übermensch concept? Are they similar on some level? Like, yeah.
Übermensch, Nietzsche is that. Mm-hmm. I think that in this perspective that I've shown, the Übermensch is the human, not the man, the mutant, or the women. The Übermensch is the human that has always surpassed this level, this physical level. So I think that there's some kind of Übermensch in X-Men. If we agree to the characterization of Nietzsche, Magneto would be a kind of Übermensch. But if we search for an Übermensch more contemporary, as the interpretation that makes Scheller of Nietzsche, that is a moderated version, Professor X would be the Übermensch. The Übermensch is this person that go beyond the values of his time. And I think Magneto and Professor X, each one in his own way, tries to make this possible. But there's another example also that I really like, that is, there's the example of the Beast. The Beast is someone that is cultivated that has definitely read Nietzsche, has read everything, but he is like a beast. he has he's blue. He's not blue in the very first version, but he's like an animal, and does make us think that maybe the way to being more empathic or more even intelligent than a man or a woman is that being an animal. And there's some perspective, perspective of biopolitics that goes in this sense. For example, from the perspective of Agamben, animals would be more close to the fundament of from the foundation of nature that meant. So if we think evolution in this term, it is very coherent that beasts would be more cultivate that the other men, like beast has a stronger spirit. But if we read Nietzsche, the Uberman mentioned the Nietzsche, it would be Magneto, I think.
All right. So another question. Also, when you're referring to X-Men, are you thinking more of movies, comic series, or animation series? Because this lore world is vast and there are some variations between different media series. So what do you specifically refer to?
Specifically, I refer to comics and the first TV series of the 90s. But I choose some examples that appears also in films as Professor X institutions that appears in series, in comics and films. The Phoenix 2 appears in 3 in Wolverine, like mutant that hurts itself 2 and Rogue 2. But about the romantic relation between Rogue and Gambit is the comic and the first series, and about and what is interesting is that cosmic level that is represented in the powers of mutant. I think we can see it in every version of this universe.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't see anything more on, or maybe I should look at the chat once more. No, I don't see anything more. So, yeah, thank you, Luz, for this fantastic presentation.
Thank you so much. It was
very nice.
Really fun, really nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm glad that the discussion was longer, so we can talk about some topics we thought about. Yeah, thank you very much. We hope to see you on another PhilosophyCon. You're invited. And so, have fun for another day with us. And we should now have a little break and then come back to FTB studio. So thank you very much. And
thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, we can leave rooms right now. Thank you.